Purple Daily is daily Vikings entertainment. We just want the Vikings to win a Super Bowl before we die.
I will ride with this group.
Seriously, man. Please.
And away we go.
All right, Purple Daily on draft every Monday right here on the Purple Daily YouTube channel and podcast feed. Tyler Fornes, Myles Gorham, my name's Declan Goff. We are inching closer. We're 10 days away from the NFL draft. We're getting closer and closer, and boy, oh boy, do we have a hell of a mock draft that came out from PFF on Monday morning that we're going to dive head first into. We're also going to discuss the All-Forno team that finally it's completed, right, Forno?
It is completed.
Okay. Heck yeah. So we're going to dive into that. And then also Myles did a little mock draft from PFF over the weekend that I want your guys' thoughts on too. So a fun show. Hit that subscribe button. You're going to see Tyler and Myles and, of course, myself at the Purple Daily Draft Party at the Fillmore too in about a week and a half. So those two dudes will be on stage with us. We'll be slinging takes. We'll be reacting to the draft. We're super pumped to meet as many of you as possible. So thank you. We're really excited for the draft at the Fillmore in Minneapolis. All right, dudes. So originally, we were going to lead with the All-Forno team, and then Forno comes on here pre-show and said, did you see the Sam Monson mock from Pro Football Focus? So Sam Monson likes to live dangerously here. So I'm going to take a look at this mock draft. I'll get your guys' reaction. It goes Caleb Williams 1, J.J. McCarthy number 2 to the Commanders, by the way. So the Commanders end up taking J.J. McCarthy, and the Broncos go up to number 3. They get Jaden Daniels. So quarterback. And also, obviously, Caleb Williams going 1, McCarthy and Daniels going 2, 3. Quarterbacks starting to fall off the board. Marvin Harrison Jr. goes to 4. Joe Alt goes to 5. Malik Neighbors goes 6. And then we scroll down a little more, and the Vikings trade up as well. They go up to pick 9. They make a trade with their division rival, the Bears. They trade up a couple spots. The Bears get pick 11 and pick 108. And the Vikings take Drake May. So the Vikings get Drake May with their first overall pick. Let me ask you guys this. I'll do a pause here quick. Do you think Drake May falls to 9? Is there a reality where he does fall to 9?
Oh, yeah, there absolutely is. I think it's very unlikely. But if you go back to the 2021 class, there were 5 quarterbacks that won the top 15. If you would have asked anybody the morning of the draft, they don't think that Justin Fields falls out of the top 5, let alone the top 10. And Will Levis, the morning of the draft last year, was, I think, minus 600 to go at 4th overall to the Indianapolis Colts. You just never know with quarterbacks. And you don't know how NFL teams are going to feel about guys, especially because they're going to differ a lot from what the media is, especially because every organization is focusing on team-specific things. I want my guy to do this and that, and I don't want them to do this and that. And because of some of those team-specific ones, whereas a lot of people in draft media are focusing more on a vacuum, they're focusing on what does this player do well and what do they not. And in those evaluations, they are not focusing on team-specific needs. So those things can differ a lot, which is why you'll see guys rise up and be drafted higher than consensus or lower than consensus for some of those specific reasons. If you look back in 2013, it's why Sharif Floyd went at 23rd overall. And when he was being mocked at 3 consistently, not a lot of teams used a 3 technique defensive tackle, and a lot of the teams that did already had one established. So that guy fell due to no fault of his own. So May could fall to 9. I still think he goes top 3, but it's not this absolutely absurd thought because we don't know how all of these teams are going to want these quarterbacks. Maybe McCarthy and Daniels do go 2 and 3, and May experiences a fall, and the Vikings can capitalize. It's a non-zero chance. We genuinely don't know because there's so many different factors that we're just not privy to.
Myles, I feel like if the Broncos traded up, though, to 3, and I know other teams could obviously still trade up, at that point I would just wait, right? Wouldn't you just wait at 11? Or would that be too risky for another team to maybe jump in and grab him before you were on the board at 11 instead of just when you traded up to 9?
It's a fair question. It does make you wonder, though, like if the Broncos are somehow able to get up to 3 rather than the Vikings, maybe the Vikings don't want to pay the price to do it, but the Broncos are willing to. Does that makes New England then a target for you to worry about behind you? They're now at 12. You're at 11. They probably still want to consider a quarterback if one of those guys falls. So you probably would need to consider moving up to make sure you jump them or even the Raiders. And to kind of go to Forno's point about those guys, historically there's usually one guy that's projected as a top 5, top 10 pick that drops. and we don't know who that guy is. Sam Monson saying it could be Drake May. People have said it could be JJ McCarthy. Like we just don't know who it could be. But more likely than not, one of those guys is probably going to fall a little further than expected. Or at least historically, we've never seen 4 quarterbacks go, right in a row in the draft. So it'd be weird to see that trend buck now. But at the same time, we haven't seen, this many teams need quarterback and have those picks, the first 3 picks especially, and then obviously if Arizona's willing to move out of 4 or not. So it's a fun talking point. But I think in kind of my scenario you talked about with the mock draft I did this weekend is what happens if the Vikings don't have to jump to 4 or 5 or 3 to still get one of those top 4 quarterbacks. Maybe then they don't have to give up pick 23. That could also change the outcome of how the Vikings handle this quarterback situation and pick 23 that they could still use to grab, one of the top defensive players.
So in this mock draft too, down to pick 23 where the Vikings would be with their second first-round pick, Kwesi makes a trade. The Patriots get pick 23 instead, and the Vikings receive picks 34 and 68. So the Vikings in this scenario get their QB1 at 9, and then they also get a couple day 2 picks. So the first round comes and goes, it's over with, and then day 2 rolls around, and the Vikings are back on the clock at 34, where they take Michael Penix. So they go quarterback in this mock draft. Sam writes up that general manager Kwesi Adofo-Mensah has a finance background, which means just diversifying and hedging. And Minnesota shocks the NFL by selecting quarterbacks in their first and second round picks. I mean, there is precedent that's happened before. Kirk Cousins, that happened with the Commanders. Now, that was later in the draft. There was a pretty big gap there. But what if in my windy fingers here, Forno, what if the Vikings go quarterback with their first 2 picks in the draft?
It's probably not going to happen. I think we need to make that point. But it's also not crazy to think about. In the 2 instances I found where teams really did make that hedge, can argue it worked out well for both teams, including the Dallas Cowboys when they took Troy Aikman first overall in 1989. And then Jimmy Johnson took his college quarterback, Steve Walsh, with a first-round pick in the 1989 supplemental draft. Now, it's not the same as using high picks in the NFL draft because the supplemental draft is an entirely different being. But by doing so, he nearly guaranteed them a top-flight quarterback. Now, nothing's ever a guarantee, but 2 is better than 1 as far as taking the chance. And they battled it out. Troy Aikman won the job, and he ended up being a Hall of Fame quarterback. So what did the Cowboys do? Well, Walsh still looked good. They flipped him to the New Orleans Saints that next September in 1990 for first and third round picks in 1991 and a second round pick in 1992 that could turn into a first round pick based on performance incentives. That's a massive haul and a significant one when you consider that they only gave up 1 first round pick to make the selection. So would the Vikings be able to flip one of those guys? They obviously could flip one of those guys. What would they get back in return? That's a major mystery, and it all depends on if both guys end up looking good. But Josh Rosen was picked 10th overall, and the next year he got flipped for, I believe it was the 62nd overall pick. So you can still recoup some assets really quickly if one guy just takes the ball and runs with it, and then you trade the other guy. If Penix becomes the guy, and then you trade Drake May, you're probably going to get significantly more capital back because of what Drake May was going into the draft. And a lot of NFL teams will use their pre-draft scouting reports and projections when they make a trade like that soon after the draft actually happened. I don't know if it's a great idea. I also don't know if it's a bad idea. But if they hit on the quarterback, I really don't care how they do it. This would give them 2 bites at the apple when, I think it's an average of about 40% of first round pick quarterbacks end up being successful at the NFL level. And that level of success is very objective because you have to determine what you believe is a level of success. Is it making Pro Bowls? Is it being a long-term starter? That baseline is going to be very fluid based on who you talk to. But if this happens and you end up with pick 68, which can get you a very solid player, especially how this class stacks up, I don't think it's a bad option. I don't know if I do it, but if it happened, I don't think I'd hate it.
So, Miles, there is a reality, though, where they do maybe take 2 quarterbacks, right? I mean, even if it's a later day 3 pick as a secondary option. But, I mean, I get the sense when we before we flipped on the mics that you would be completely anti this move of going quarterback first, second round.
We've all talked about it. I just don't see it as a possibility. I think the scenarios we've already discussed that have been discussed just now were completely different. Like the Troy Aikman one, that was a supplemental draft, so that's a little bit different than like a traditional back-to-back guy draft. And then they were able to flip that guy right away because the supplemental draft changes the outcome of a little bit about your roster rather than like, hey, we took this guy in the NFL draft, not the supplemental draft. So I thought that was a little bit different. And then the Kirk Cousins situation in Washington. The one thing we've heard, and this is what I was going to bring up, is the rift that happened between the front office and the coaching staff in terms of favoritism. RG3 versus Kirk Cousins became a rift within that situation, and that to me is what this would be. And you would enhance that even more because you took both guys within the top 35, and I think that in itself would create a huge rift. That to me would say one side was really on Drake May, one side was really on Michael Penix, and one of them is going to win out on who's going to be our future quarterback, whether it's letting them compete on the field or the front office or the ownership makes that final decision, right? So there's a rift that kind of creates that. And then how does that rift create in the locker room? Like all these things impact. Some players in the locker room might want one guy, some might want the other. Like there's so many things that just like create impeding, takes away focus on what what you're trying to do and what you're trying to accomplish with that. So I think that would just make it too hard. I think at least with the RG3 and Kirk Cousins situation, there was enough separation in their draft status that, before RG3 truly got hurt, he could fend that off and say, that's the quarterback we've invested in. Here, you could make a case for either guy because the investment, yes, 9th overall is more than 34th. That's still a strong draft capital to use for a guy. So Drake May fending off Michael Penix in this situation is a lot less likely if Penix is still a good player. I love the idea of trading one guy, a year later. I just think it's hard to know and hard to put that trust into one guy and then tell your locker room, we took both guys though because we feel both were worth it. It's just such a hard situation to do that with. I think other positions, if you want to go in that route, I totally get it. But quarterback I just think that'd be too high. And I also don't know if taking a guy on day 3 really does much for me because at that point, like, again, you do have Jaren Hall, who still has 3 years left on his contract. Who knows how they actually feel about Jaren Hall moving forward? Maybe they like him as their future backup. I'm all for adding developmental QBs to your roster, but you also have Sam Darnold and Nick Mullins are all under contract right now. So then you're just adding another quarterback. Like, I think that to me just creates a lot of like too many cooks in one kitchen scenario. And it just take away the Penix situation, but like adding one on day 3 in that case too would just create that. So I think to me it's like you take a guy in round 1 and let it ride. That's just kind of how I see it happening.
You muted Forno on StreamYard.
Yes, I am. I love doing that just to kind of
does it all the time. So
shout out Judd Zolgad.
Off on you. Yeah.
I do think that Myles brings up a really, really good point of we don't talk enough about locker room dynamics, and that locker room dynamic, especially because I know Myles, you played college football, that can really be a deterrent to making some of these decisions. And it's an intangible that the average fan and even draft analysts don't necessarily consider. But I will say this about the situation in Washington. They had a regime change. And I think that regime change made a massive swing because it's not like Mike and Kyle Shanahan were still there. And if they were still there, maybe things are different. And Jay Gruden wanted Kirk Cousins. He did not want RG3. And RG3 kind of did it to himself. And that's part of the Jaden Daniels discussion. RG3 kept getting hurt. And he kept inviting some of those hits that helped him get hurt. Remember that first start with the Browns? Instead of just running out of bounds, he leans in, cracks his shoulder blade. And that pretty much ended his career as a starting quarterback. So I think there's so many different factors. And I really appreciated what Myles brought up with the intangibles, because if you've never been in a locker room, you may not think about some of those things because they're real dynamics that front offices and coaching staffs have to consider.
Yeah, and I also think it shortens the leash on in this case it would be Drake May. it shortens the leash on what your investment is on Drake May, because he's got someone literally breathing down his throat, his neck, ready to take over. And as as you mentioned, Forno, guys in the background in the locker room are going to gravitate toward one or the other. That always happens. Now, if one guy clearly is better than the other, that guy's going to get the pull. But if they're not, then that creates that continued rift, and that it's always tough. So yeah, I'm with you there.
It feels like if they were to do, like, I know what Sam is saying, that it's a hedge and, Kwesi with the financial thing. But yeah, if Drake May was like Kevin O'Connell's guy with a bullet and they got up, they get him, great. But then, 24 hours later when day 2 rolls around, Kwesi says, hey, we're going to take Michael Penix. I would feel like KOC would be like, what? Why would we even do that? So, and yes, general managers manage, coaches coach. But I feel like if Kwesi even suggested that to him, I think Kevin O'Connell would say, no, you're going to take someone else. You take a BPA, you take someone else that we need that can help our team. You don't take 2 quarterbacks. It's a fun idea. I like it. It's very reckless for Sam Monson. I was a big fan of it. Let's take a look at this also mock draft that Myles did on PFF from over the weekend. He tweeted this out. I'll walk through some of this, but Myles trades up to 8 here. And the Falcons would get pick 11, they'd get pick 108 from the Vikings, and they'd get pick 129 from the Vikings. And Minnesota takes J.J. McCarthy at pick 8. So in this instance, Myles, you take J.J. I'm guessing Daniels and May were all off the board at that point?
Yeah, first three teams to quarterback. I think it was PFF's mock always it alternates between Drake May and Jaden Daniels, and anyone I do at going at 2 to Washington. I think this one it was Drake May at 2, Jaden Daniels at 3. But either way, all 3 of those guys went first, and then I think Marvin Harrison went 4th. I can't remember the exact order, and then obviously McCarthy fell to 8. That just told me that I think the Giants snagged Malik Neighbors at 6, and that to me is feels like a reality. And I think the Giants truly want a playmaking wide receiver. So if they can get a team like the Vikings, the Broncos to jump up to 4 or 5. That just allows one of those receivers to fall to them at 6. So that to me is always that just feels like a straight smokescreen. I think they really want, as much as I think they'd like a quarterback, I think they want that playmaker. And see if they can kind of get one more year to Daniel Jones before they make a true altering decision on their at quarterback. And so McCarthy was the guy that fell in this case, and I felt, hey, what if, because we haven't seen it before, what if that 4th quarterback falls to the point where you don't have to give up that pick 23 to get him? I would love that. I think that everything we've heard recently is the Vikings didn't go to the Texans to get pick 23. The Texans came to them. So that also tells me that, the Vikings saw it as a really good opportunity to have more leverage to trade up if they have to use that pick. But what if they don't? What if they can still get their quarterback and still then use pick 23 to do whatever they want, whether it's take the best player available at 23 or in this scenario trade back and try to recoup some of the assets you used to get 23 in the first place. So I kind of viewed it that way, and I was like, well, what if you play that scenario? It's one I haven't seen many do, and so let's see how it plays out. I think the Vikings could come away and we'll say the first 32 picks, you come away with your starting quarterback and a player like Chop Robinson or a top tier, one of the top defenders. I know Forno loves Chop, but getting a defender in general, with either 23 or a trade back, I think would be a home run, and something that I think the Vikings would love to do, rather than having to use both assets to trade up to get a guy that might not be worth pick 4, but maybe in this case he's worth two 4th round picks to go up 4, but maybe not 2 1st round picks to go up 4.
Forno, I feel like this would be a chef kiss scenario, right? You get J.J. McCarthy at 8 and then Chop Robinson at 32. I feel like you'd walk away from the draft party maybe like Stone Cold Steve Austin pouring beers all over your head.
Oh my
I'd
gosh,
have to drive Forno home. I'm driving Forno home that night if that happens.
Luckily, Myles, you wouldn't have to do that. My wife will be there, and it would be cool. An hour and a half round trip for you because I live on the way west side.
A day like this, that'd be worth it, though, man.
Oh, absolutely. Chop Robinson's my 4th overall player in this class, and I'm okay being different from consensus on him because a lot of the issues that I think other people have with him, I just don't have as big of concerns because I don't really do comps that much, but I will comp stylistically, and sometimes a comp just fits, and then I'll use it. I don't force them. Some people in the industry are required to have comps for everybody because that's what their bosses want, but that's not necessarily what's always best for business. I get shades of Von Miller when I watch Chop Robinson, and the shade I get is that first step. That first step is so lethal that he can use it in the run game. He can use it to be disruptive in the passing game. He's not a finished product, but he could be a top flight 15 sack a year edge rusher pretty quickly if you get some of those technical elements added in for him. And getting him at 32 to me would be just an incredible steal. And then Michael Hall Jr., really interesting gap shooter on the interior of that defensive line. I think he goes round 2, but it wouldn't shock me considering how varied I've seen analysts on him. And if you see analysts varied on him, it's likely NFL teams are too, because you can kind of put 2 and 2 together. Like if there's that big of a gap between how people feel about one player on the consensus from the media side, it's highly unlikely that you're going to get NFL teams all being pretty consensus about that same player. So this would be a very interesting draft. A lot of high upside athletes, especially a guy like Casey Washington, who's got some pretty good explosiveness and quickness scores.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of his.
Yeah, he's a small boy, but that doesn't necessarily mean a bad.
No, Casey's the other one. That's forward. Isaiah. Isaiah's the small one. Casey's the big receiver. So
Casey's the big one. Okay.
Yeah, they got 2 coming out of Illinois. Isaiah named after my son. No. Yeah, I looked at both, and I think Casey just gives you a little bit more of the a little bit more downfield ability, whereas Isaiah was more of a true slot guy. Didn't run and test as well as I expected him to, but I liked both guys. And then I think I saw this triggered. You had mentioned on the timeline for Noah about moving tackles to guards. Isaiah Adams, to me, I was like, Adams played left guard in 2022, but they kicked him out to right tackle in 2023. But his numbers on PFF, he played way better at left guard than he did at right tackle. And I was like, 5th round, take a guy that has some position versatility. I was like, let's take a chance. Maybe he becomes your starting left guard, or at least a depth piece. I felt that was at least good value for it. I don't know a lot about him, but just the things I read up on him, to take him at 5, I was like, hey, he played interior. Maybe he could do it now. He's a big, strong dude, so I know that the Vikings could use that in the interior.
I'm fine moving tackles to guard in general, but come on. The Vikings don't need to take Tyler Guyton at 23rd overall. They don't need to take J.C. Latham at 11th overall. Like, yeah.
I agree with that.
To me, it drives me bonkers how many times, and you know what? We're going to pull this up because it's been driving me insane looking at some of these mock drafts and how many people keep sending tackles to the Minnesota Vikings. It's like, okay, are you sure you know what you're doing? Are you sure you understand what this team is? Like, Talise Fuaga could move to guard 1 time. Amarius Mims, 1. Tyler Guyton and J.C. Latham, 2. Jackson Powers Johnson, 4. Like, guys, the Vikings offensive line is okay-ish. We don't need to force them. Oh, the Vikings have offensive line issues. Did you watch the team last year? Do you understand how this team is being built and the fact that we have 2 Pro Bowl / All-Pro caliber tackles?
Yeah.
That, to me, that's the frustrating thing. Like, if you think that, 23, the best value here is to take a J.C. Latham who you can put at guard right away, and if you need to move him to right tackle down the line, if you move on from O'Neal, okay, I understand that logic. But one computer simulation, which is one of the mock drafts I grabbed, was J.C. Latham and Tyler Guyton. What are we doing? What in the world are we doing here?
Trading Christian Darrisaw, apparently, which is just not going to happen. So.
Look, you give me 2 first-round picks for Christian Darrisaw in this draft, and then I can get a top tackle. I'd consider it.
Yeah, that's a different conversation.
But still, like, come on. Let's just be realistic here. Like, please know the teams you're picking for before you make those picks. That's all I ask.
Forno, so you have been working hard on the All-Forno team. Guys that you really like that stood out on tape. So why don't you explain to the audience what the All-Forno team is, and are there members of the All-Forno team that you can very well see in purple for the Vikings this year?
So the All-Forno team has 2 requirements. I max out at 2 first-round grades because everybody likes watching first-round tape. And it's not about that. It's about, when I watch this guy rules. And it's a complete vibes thing. It has no other requirements other than I only do 2 per position and then 2 first-round grades. Those are the only requirements. I just love watching your film. And this year we had 8 guys, and it's a really, really fun process because it's all about fun. And I know a lot of guys like have their my guys, but these guys I would also stand up and pound the table for them. So I'll kind of run through them quickly. And you've heard me mention a lot of these names before. I got two cornerbacks, Louisville's Jarvis Brownlee Jr. and Notre Dame's Cam Hart. Brownlee is just an aggressive maven. He is going to be in your face. He is going to punch you in the mouth, and he is going to use that aggressiveness when attacking you and the football. A little bit undersized. He's 5'11", like 190 pounds, but man, this guy just plays the position like somebody you'd want. And Cam Hart is kind of that freaky height, weight, speed guy. A little less impressive athletically than what Julius Brents was last year. And Brents made the All-Forno team as well. So maybe I have a little bit of a type. But Hart played extremely well against Marvin Harrison Jr. this year and really made it difficult for him to make a lot of explosive plays due to that length and that speed and explosiveness. I've got two defensive front guys, Tavondre Sweat. Look, Sweat's got issues. We know about the DWI arrest last weekend, and he struggles kind of taking on double teams. But man, if he just shoots the gap, goodbye. And it was a lot of fun watching him. If he can ever figure out how to take double teams, this dude could be really, really special. But that's like a big concern for him. And then Marshawn Nealon, the edge from Western Michigan. He was used in so many unique ways. Think of a front seven player utilized like the Vikings used Josh Metellus last year, where Metellus was just all over the back end. They were using Nealon as a stand-up defensive tackle on the second level, and then he would blitz, and he would rush off the edge. If you got time, go watch his Iowa tape, where Western Michigan took on Iowa. They were doing all sorts of funky things with him, and he's got the juice. One offensive lineman this year, Troy Fautanu, Washington. This guy's got special movement skills. And when Brian O'Neill came out, that was kind of the thing with him. He's a former tight end, and he could just move incredibly well. Super, super athlete. Fautanu moves like a tight end, and he's 315 pounds. He's only 6'3" and 5/8", but he's got 34.5-inch arms. He's got the size to play tackle, and I want to see him play tackle before I move him inside. But I loved what I saw. One running back, Dylan Labe from New Hampshire. Mm-hmm. This dude plays like a slot receiver. Yeah. And he's got the juice to play running back. I worried about the athleticism because sometimes FCS tape, you can't properly judge the athleticism just due to the level of competition. So you really want to see the athletic testing. I believe he ran a 4.52, and the agility drills were good. The explosiveness drills were good. He's not a super high-end athlete, but it's plenty good enough for the running back position considering all the other elements he has. Then I have two wide receivers. Adonai Mitchell. I was blown away watching his tape. I didn't really know what to expect going in because he had such little production, but that's not his fault. Quinn Ewers stinks. And that Georgia offense ran through the running game and Brock Bowers. So his first 2 years at Georgia, like he still played really well and put up big numbers for what their offense is. And I think that context needs to be taken into effect when you're looking at, hey, these target share numbers and yards per route run. You have to understand what the offense is in order to properly give credit. Plus, they just kept feeding Xavier Worthy the football, and they did it extremely effectively at Texas. And that's not necessarily Mitchell's fault either. Plus, he had Jatavian Sanders, a really strong running game, and a quarterback who stinks. So those factor in. And then my favorite player in this class, the captain of the All-Forno team. Previous captains, Peyton Turner. Last year's captain was Josh Downs. This year, Malachi Corley. Love Malachi Corley. And you're going to see some people talking about, his poor average depth of target. That's really not his fault because of what Western Kentucky asked him to do in the air raid. He shows nuance running routes down the field. It's not consistent, but he's also not consistently running those routes. And he proved in Mobile that some of that release package, that separation at the stem and being able to kind of separate himself downfield, it works really well. And I love what I see from Malachi Corley. I think he's going to translate really well, but he also needs to go to the right offense. He needs a Kyle Shanahan inspired system where he can run those overs, where he can run those digs, and you can utilize him early, get the ball in his hands, let him continue to develop that stuff. And you could have a fringe wide receiver one down the line. I think that's his absolute ceiling. I don't know if he ever gets there. And I think if he ends up being a wide receiver too, you're in great shape. But Malachi Corley, 40 missed tackles for us as a wide receiver in 2022. This dude is a baller. And that, ladies and gentlemen, 2024 All-Forno team.
Bravo, man. Bravo. I love it. On Corley, an insane amount of production, just production value. I mean, 259 catches, 3,000 yards in college. He had 29 touchdowns. I mean, that I know sometimes we might overlook sometimes with the production, but I mean, that is an insane amount of production in college. I mean, Myles, I know you're a big wide receiver guy. He would fit right in Kevin O'Connell's offense, you think?
Yeah, I mean, he gives you the just get the ball in his hands and let him make a play type guy. And that's a really good compliment to Jordan Addison and Justin Jefferson to me. Because I think that you could interchange all three guys and move them all around. I don't think Corley's just like one of those like slot only types just because he's a little smaller. Like that's always gets the people always use that as like just because the guy's a little shorter, that means that he has to be a slot. That's just not true. It's all about how they play. And I think Corley's that guy that could play, inside and out. There's obviously some refinement to be done there, but he's just a guy early in his career. You just get him the ball, let him make plays, and that's how he could develop. I mean, the pressure on him in this offense would be zero. So you allow him just to be a playmaker. And as he develops, maybe you add more to his plate than what you ask him to do. But early on in his career, he could just be a playmaker. And I think that's important for rookies. I especially if they're not first round picks, you're not asking them a lot. Just come be a playmaker for us, get the ball in their hands in a variety of ways. On gadgets and quick screens and stuff like that. I think that's always important for guys early. Debo Samuel will always be the like typical comp. He's not obviously quite as big or strong as Debo, but there's that similar style. And I think
that's not entirely true, Myles. He is Debo sized. He's 5'11", 215. I believe.
Is he that big? I thought he was. I didn't know he weighed that much. I thought he was like.
He is built. And what's really interesting that I forgot to mention about Corley, 2-star recruit at cornerback, and then they moved him to running back, and then they moved him to wide receiver. So he's still relatively new at the position. There's untapped potential.
The refinement, definitely needs to be there. But I'm with you. Like I didn't know he was that big. I knew he's big and I knew he's strong, but I didn't know he's that big. So that's always fun because like let that guy just get the ball in his hands and let him play. Like I love those kind of guys.
Shirtless pick, the weightlifting pick that we saw with DK Metcalf and AJ Brown. He's a little smaller than those guys, but the amount of definition and muscle mass is real with Corley. And I would stand up and pound the table for him as early as pick 45 if the Vikings end up picking somewhere around there. Like I love this dude's game. And you know what? Yeah. My favorite players in almost every single draft class end up in New Orleans Saint. So I'm just preparing for it to happen again.
Mine's Packers, especially when it comes to wide receiver. Last year's Jaden Daniels. I was a huge Devontae Adams fan back in the day. But I think the Vikings need to snag a mid-round wide receiver. I think that's a bigger need than that. I like Brandon Powell. I think if you need him to be your step-in wide receiver 3, sorry, my kids are home. If you need him to be a wide receiver 3, like that's no problem this year. But I think you need to have somebody that's a long-term play there. Rather than and it's not like everyone always focuses about now. The draft is not just about now. It's about focusing on future needs. And if you could fill those in the draft now for future, that's always important because then that becomes it's a less of a need for the future. So if you can get a guy like Corley, I mean, I don't know exactly where he's going to go, whether it's a deep wide receiver draft, but you get a guy like that, late second, early third, and you get one of those picks and a trade back from 23 or something, I'm all for it.
Malachi Corley, give him to me.
I want him or Roman Wilson. I'm a huge Roman Wilson fan in that range too, so I wouldn't be surprised if he goes 3-4, round 3-4. But I'm a Roman Wilson guy for not same reasons as Corley, but I think there's a lot of like you could use that guy as be your third receiver, let him run a lot of screens and those things and use their speed and make plays.
Just be an over route god. That's all you got to be.
Oh my God. I like Amon-Ra St. Brown light, like to the nth degree light. Like.
I dig it. Hey, by the way, cheap plug for Friday. We won't be doing this during the draft, but on Friday afternoon from 3 to 5 p.m., Purple Daily we're going to host a little happy hour at 3 Jack, which is a golf simulator right there in the North Loop. From 3 to 5, you go to scorenorth.com/event. You'll see a thing there. This is a free event, but we're just asking for a head count, so you just fill out a little form. Free event to come hang out before round 2 starts. We'll see if the Vikings end up making a pick on day 2. They're not scheduled to as of now. We'll probably have a more accurate feeling of that, obviously, after day 1. But we will be doing a little event at 3 Jack there in the North Loop after or before round 2 and 3 start of the draft. So come hang out with us and go to scorenorth.com/event to register for that. And a shout out to our friends too at Nicolay Law. So our guy Russ from Nicolay Law, if you've been personally injured, he's your guy. Humongous Vikings fan. We appreciate him. You've probably seen that big gorgeous beard of his all over town. Shout out to Nicolay Law for sponsoring programming too on Purple Daily on Draft. And Forno, last plug for you. Where can people find that All-Forno team? Is that on your Twitter? Where can people go to see more on that?
I will have an article up later today on Monday. It'll be on the Sporting News. I'll share it on my Twitter at the Real Forno, and then okay. I'm excited. We're gonna have team pages built by the end of the month, so it'll be a lot easier to go find all my stuff instead of just kind of aimlessly searching, which is the situation at the moment. But it's going to be out, and there's going to be some descriptions on more in-depth descriptions on why I like each guy. And I'll have the captains of the All-Forno team from years past. One of them, which I forgot to mention, wide receiver Chris Olave, which I had him wide receiver 1, and I still feel vindicated that I was right.
Nice. I love it, man. Yes, you can follow at Real Forno. Myles, I believe yours is at Myles Gorham 85. Is that your Twitter handle, I believe, too? So you can follow both these dudes. I love it. Hit that subscribe button for daily Minnesota Vikings entertainment. This is Purple Daily on Draft. We're getting excited. We're about 10 days away. Can't wait. We'll see you all at the Fillmore for those who are coming, and we'll obviously be streaming on the YouTube channel, too. So Purple Daily, daily Vikings entertainment.